So hello here to everyone today. I've just been told my name's Oliver Torello and I'm currently studying chemistry right here at Victoria University of Wellington. And during my time here at Vic, I've actually had the pleasure of being lectured by Sir Paul Callaghan himself. And for me, it's very inspiring when I see people at the front of the lecture theatre talk with such passion, enthusiasm and an engageable manner, especially when you know that they're world-class scientists. So I think it's entirely apt this event today, which is based on science communication, is in his honour. And another thing that I admired about Sir Paul is he didn't seem to narrowly focus on his niche subject. But you'd often see him in the papers or having written articles or given talks about the broader implications, the sort of social, economic, administrative and educational sides to modern day science in New Zealand today. He definitely saw the big picture, and so with that in mind, I hope to give you a big picture presentation today. Hopefully not compromising too much on the technical detail as well. So in choosing a topic today, it really got me thinking why I love science so much. And a big part of it for me was viewing scientists as the people who are coming up with new and creative solutions to our big problems and our big questions. So that got me thinking, what's the absolute biggest global problem I could think of, and what can we do in New Zealand not only contribute, but hopefully get a bit of a leg up in the process as well. So, the absolute biggest problem that I could think of was the quest for renewable energy. I don't think it's too misleading to say that our world economy has been based around oil, cheap, abundant oil. It's all pervasive, really. It's been used in pretty much everything from electricity generation, transport, packaging, manufacturing. And it served us pretty well, but one problem is glaringly obvious. It's not a renewable source of energy. It's going to run out. Peak oil is the point in time where the maximum rate of oil extraction is going to be reached. And the International Energy Agency predicts this point for 2012. There are some people who say that's too conservative. We're actually hitting peak oil right now. Either way, it's situation serious. And this is going to have long-term, widespread negative economic effects. And to say nothing about the huge problem faced by global climate change. And of course, climate change ties back into the economics when you take into account increasing prevalence of things like emissions trading schemes. Okay, so I guess I should mention that not all countries have oil as well. And in the future, I think you might see, it's going to be harder to ward off hostile countries as well that might be interested in your oil, if you do have it, that is. So coupled to this, the fact that worldwide electricity demand is likely to increase due to things like modernisation of developing countries. And what you've got is a strong incentive to be able to produce energy in a way that doesn't require fossil fuels. Okay, so one solution you can do this is nuclear power. And we've got to be honest with ourselves. There's some really good things about nuclear power. It doesn't use fossil fuels. It can create a huge amount of energy. And it's fairly reliable as well. But there's some glaringly obvious problems with it as well. The fact that it's not renewable either. It's very expensive. And the radioactive waste is a huge problem. I mean, we only need to look at Japan to see the disastrous sort of consequences it can have. And we know all too well about earthquakes here in New Zealand. So I think our nuclear-free stance is definitely a wise one. Okay, so the solution, I believe, lies in the sun. The sun is the most abundant form of renewable energy. And in fact, it shines down more than 5,000 times more energy than the total power consumption by humankind. Okay, so it's not so much a problem of energy scarcity. It's about how can we harness all the abundant energy that's right there. So I think right off the bat, it's probably, I think it's good to say that although it's a huge problem, it's a problem that's ultimately solvable. Okay, so there are a lot of renewable energy sources that are actually based on the sun. For example, hydropower, which is our major source of renewable energy here in New Zealand, can actually be linked back to the sun. If you think of the sun heating up bodies of water in the sea, that water evaporates and rises, and we make use of that gravitational potential energy as it comes back down the side of our mountains in the form of rivers. A sort of similar chain of reasoning can be applied to wind power as well. And in fact, even petrol, to be honest, because the chemical potential energy in the oil was once in ancient forests, which in turn got their energy from the sun. But it's not a renewable form of solar energy. So New Zealand already does a pretty good job of renewable energy, actually. About 70% of all of our electricity generation comes from renewable sources. But there's still a lot of work to go. And when you talk about things like hydro, a lot of them are strict to capacity. There's varying water levels and stuff like that. And they too have a they're quite invasive on the geography of our land. So the solution I want to talk to you about is probably the most direct and less invasive form of this solar energy. And that's photovoltaics. Okay. So what is photovoltaics? It's not to be confused with solar thermal energy, which uses the heat energy from the sun to heat bodies of water, which then you can use or use to generate steam to drive a turbine to generate electricity. It generates electricity directly from the sun into electricity by something called the photovoltaic effect, which we'll talk about a little bit more soon. Okay, so what are the good things about solar? Apart from what we've talked about, it's quite direct, it's ininvasive, it's quiet, it's attractive, it's relatively easy to install, it's easy to maintain as there's no moving parts. The thing I really like about solar is it can be produced on different scales. It's quite hard to manufacture a hydro dam in your backyard, but with solar it's a very viable option. And you know, it sort of puts people in control of their own power generation, which is quite good. And it gives them sort of security from that. And it generates electricity at the point of use, which is really good as well, because it can actually save you quite a lot on transmission losses and stuff. So and on the other end of the scale, they can be produced en masse in large solar farms, which can produce quite an impressive amount of electricity. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the existing technology today, which is based on silicon. It's essentially a bilayer device consisting of electron-rich and electron-deficient silicon. And that's sandwiched between two sort of electrodes up here. The top one's transparent to let the sunlight through. And basically what you get is the electrons from the silicon absorb the light, and they get promoted to a conduction band where they're deglycolized from the nucleus of the atom, and they're free to conduct electricity. It's a little bit simplistic, but the solar cells I want to talk about differ from this slightly. So I think the take-home message about silicon solar cells I want to get through is that they're made from expensive materials and they're very difficult to manufacture. And it's to do with sort of purifying the silicon, which kind of uses a lot of elevated temperatures and vacuum deposition steps, which are quite complicated. So the alternative to this being actively researched here in New Zealand is using polymer solar cells. And that's basically using conducting polymers or plastics as the active substrate for this material. Okay, and New Zealand's actually already played its part in conductive polymers, with a former Victoria graduate, Alan McDiarmid, getting the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2000 for it. And the medal's actually displayed in that new Alan McDiarmid building just past the library if anyone wants to check it out. It's quite a beautiful medal, actually. I was quite impressed. So in terms of solar cells, what their advantage is they're going to reduce the cost of production. And in particular, what I want to talk about is this sort of roll-to-roll print processing sort of thing. Because these materials can be produced in solution at low temperatures with no need for vacuum deposition, what you can kind of get is their productions. You can produce screeds and screeds of this using technology that's sort of familiar to us already, from making flexible food packaging. So if you think of like a chip packet, which is maybe has a layer of aluminium, then plastics and dyes across it. It's all based in solution, printed out really fast, and this has got the potential to reduce costs by drastically upping the economies of scale. But basically the main problem is they currently lag behind the silicon technology in terms of efficiency. So in terms of, that's the biggest challenge, is upping the efficiency of these cells. To do that, we need to know a little bit more about how they work. So let's see if we can roll up our sleeves and do a bit of science. So this guy here is your conducting polymer here. So what you see is long chains along here sort of thing. A couple little side chains for solubility purposes. But the main thing is, if you kind of look at it from this direction, it's alternating double and single bonds through, these are carbon atoms, by the way. And that allows it to conduct electricity. And so its job is to absorb the light, and you see the electron going from a lower level orbital. I hope some of you are familiar with orbitals and stuff. Gets promoted to a high level orbital here. The thing that's different to silicon is essentially the electron is still bound to the molecule, and it kind of wants to go back down here after a certain amount of time. So what we need to do really is to generate a free charge. We need to rip that electron off the molecule. So that's when you bring this other material in here. And these guys are really cool. They're basically 60 carbon atoms in the form of a tiny, tiny soccer ball. And again, side chains for solubility. But its sort of role in this sort of solar cell is you bring it extremely close to this guy, and the electron can kind of jump across to him sort of thing. And in that way, you separate the charges out, and this can conduct electricity as well. It's a poor absorber, but it's a good conductor. So that can conduct electricity away, and the solar cell can work. And what I say, these transitions are happening quite fast, actually about a nanosecond before it wants to jump back down on, to recombine on this own material. And so in that sort of time frame, it can only move about 10 nanometers in length sort of thing. So you really need to encounter one of these guys, in sort of 10 nanometers. But also you need about 200 nanometers to provide sufficient absorption. So what you end up with is, hopefully you can see over here, is sort of this bulk nanostructured material. You've got little domains of each of about 10 nanometers length of each of these two different alternating materials. Okay, so that's a bit about the mechanism. Okay, to optimize this sort of efficiency of these solar cells, as I mentioned before, like the time scale is extremely small, sometimes within a few millionths of a billionth of a second. And so to probe these occurrences, we need a method that works on these time scales. And so a research team here at Vic, led by Justin Hodgkiss, is using state-of-the-art laser technology and extremely fast laser pulses of light, sequences of laser pulses of light. So the first pulse sort of triggers the absorption, and by analysis of the subsequent laser pulses, we can gain information about how the electron behaves. And so we here at Vic are sort of investigating the different the effects of varying different parameters, like using new materials, the ratios of different materials, the solvent system that we use, and stuff like that. So it's in this way that we're ultimately, the laser technology is helping us to design better and more efficient solar cells. And this is a little picture of Justin here with one of the instruments. And he's actually doing a lot of his research in the Ellen McDiarmid building, just a floor up from where the metal's stored as well. So it's quite exciting research, and I think it's even made more so by our close proximity right now. Okay, so the future of polymer solar cells. So what we'd like to do is up the efficiency to a target of about 10%, which is it's very doable. From 1992, they're about 0.04%. Now the top ones we're making about 8.59%. So at this sort of percentage, we think they'll be economically competitive with silicon solar cells. And then we can start really, really utilizing the sort of economies of scale of this roll-to-roll print processing. So this is just a graph about the overall price trends of solar PV. And what we want to do is be operating to try and get that down a bit further as well. There's just some figures about the cost of power in New Zealand. 2008, it went up the residential went up 44% from 2000. So they're only going to keep rising. And projections about how much, what the pricing is for per kilowatt hour is it's about in line with this commercial figure here as well. So hopefully that can sort of like induce a bit of widespread uptake in residential homes. And I want to talk a little bit about sort of policies that we could use called like feed-in tariffs, which is the government and the energy companies working together to provide long-term contracts for people who use these sort of systems and grid connect and sell back to the grid. So I think these sort of schemes and stuff have been very, very good at increasing uptake in places like Japan and Germany. it's the German summer right now, and they recently posted 20% of one of their days was entirely solar powered. So if you think about small, tiny contributions adding up, these are quite big numbers. And in terms of using these technologies in solar farms, I would look to partner with our friends across the ditch in Australia, sort of thing. They've got abundant sunshine hours and lots of space right next to pretty thirsty cities, so hopefully we can partner up with them at some stage. Okay, so the challenges facing us, again, I mentioned, is basically increasing the efficiency of these things, which we can do by increasing the charge separation, which I've talked about, by the structural morphology of the cells, designing new materials that increase absorption and voltage, and also increasing the product lifetime and oxidation of electrodes. But yeah, there's a lot of research being done into all sorts of these fields, and it's actually coming along pretty fast, and I'm very hopeful for the future about it. Another big problem, I've written in a different colour down the bottom there, because it's not endemic to polymer solar cells as such, but it's probably the biggest problem with solar PV at the moment. It's the problem of energy storage. These things don't work when there's no sun, you know what I mean? So, this is not necessary. You don't necessarily need energy storage. You can just sell back to the grid and reduce electricity demand in other ways, sort of thing like that. But there's been some good advances in energy storage right now, which I want to talk about. So there's been some advances in conventional battery technology, liquid iron metal battery technology, large-scale solutions like pumping water uphill and then sort of utilising that energy back as when you need it, sort of thing, in the nighttime. But I want to just talk briefly a little bit about a solution that I find really elegant, which is fuel cells. So, so this graph here just shows you the sort of, in the black here you've got your solar production, and then in the purple you've got your household use, and you can see there's a bit of a discrepancy in there. So basically this diagram here is it's a simple diagram about how fuel cells work. So basically what you do is when you've got too much energy, you use that energy to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. When you need that energy, you recombine them, the reaction gives off energy, and you can use it that way. And so here's just a simple diagram about how these can be integrated into our houses. So in this diagram, you've got not only linked to a reversible fuel cell, but if you've charged that up as much as you can have, you can sell back the excess to the grid as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the sort of consequences that this could provide for off-the-grid living as well. For like a uniquely Kiwi perspective, I'm quite tantalised by the fact that you could go and sort of make a batch in somewhere secluded like the Coromandel or something like that. And with these sort of technologies, in tandem with mobile broadband or something like that, you can be completely self-connected but completely self-contained as well. And this has broader implications for overseas, like places like Pacific Islands and places like Middle East and Africa. So you see in Africa and things like that, a lot of the countries are going straight to mobile communication technologies, eschewing the grid. Maybe there's not a grid, or maybe it's politically unstable. Maybe the supply is not so good. So I think these sort of off-the-grid solutions are really going to provide a bit of stability, and in tandem with sort of mobile technologies, kind of produce a paradoxical effect where you get these off-the-grid living situations actually increasing the connectedness of the world. Okay, so bringing it back to polymer solar cells and how it can benefit us. There's been a couple of individual hiccups in the green market, but it's absolutely assured to be a dominant force in tomorrow's market. And this represents a way that we can be world leaders and get our foot in the door in this sort of market as well. So there's potential for profits in many areas. So you're talking about things like marketing, branding, installation, maintenance, any way we can provide high-tech jobs is a good service done. But even manufacturing, it's actually a viable option to have these things manufactured in New Zealand. Like I said before, it was analogous to making flexible food packaging. It's a little bit more high-tech than that, but it's actually nowhere near as high-tech or as capital-intensive as making something like a plasma screen TV. So there's actually good potential to get a good industry going here. And should we choose to forego that sort of manufacturing role, or part of the manufacturing role, there's actually plenty of money to be made in things like patenting new materials and novel processes and licensing these to other companies. And that all comes at quite a modest cost, really. So also involvement is going to improve our clean green image, which is obviously vital for things like tourism and agriculture in New Zealand in general. And I mean, who knows, if you drastically reduce the cost of solar, there might be another Nobel Prize waiting in the wings. That's only going to inspire new generations of Kiwis to think more interestingly about science, and I'm sure that's what Sir Paul would have wanted. But that's coming back to the real reason we kind of were talking about making these things in the first place. It's the long-term financial and environmental gains that we can get from solar cells. So this is a really new, exciting technology. I'm glad we got our foot in the door, and hopefully we can use it to squeeze a bit more opportunity out of them in the future. Okay, thank you. I think that's all I'd like to say.